Sean Strickland is the new UFC middleweight champion of the world. And if you were to tell me just a year ago following the Pereira fight that Sean Strickland would be the champion and that he would take the belt off of Israel Adesanya, I would have told you there's no chance. But there was in fact a chance, and he made it look easy. Even as a massive underdog, somewhere around plus 600, where everybody counted him out. No one thought he had any chance, including myself. I thought there was no way that Sean Strickland had any chance. However, the craziest part was that although it was somewhat competitive, he clearly beat Izzy, and he beat him at his own game. He outstruck him, he outjabbed him, he outfeinted him, and he didn't even get hit clean once. Against one of the best strikers in UFC history, he didn't get hit clean once. He was actually the one hitting Adesanya cleanly, who is notoriously known for being one of the hardest fighters to hit. He even dropped Izzy at the end of the first round. And it was the first time Izzy had ever been dropped in the UFC. Jan Blachowicz, whose nickname is the Polish Power for how hard he hits, never dropped Izzy in their fight. Jared Cannonier, who was a former heavyweight, never dropped Izzy. Even Alex Pereira, who is known for sending people into other dimensions with his hands, never dropped Izzy throughout their two fights. However, Pillow Hands Sean Strickland was the first to do it. I mean, this guy never knocks anyone down. He is known for winning decisions. However, in this fight, he knocks Adesanya down with a straight right hand while he's against the fence, and even almost finishes the fight with ground and pound. I think it was somewhere around 20 unanswered shots. I mean, that fight was seconds away from being stopped right then and there in the first round. And this gave him so much confidence. You could see his body language walking out for the fight before the fight started, just how nervous he was. However, after he knocked down one of the greatest middleweights in the world in the first round, you could see just how much his confidence growed through his body language and through how he acted, now knowing that he can hurt this guy. Izzy's game plan was actually fairly simple, and it's pretty much what he does against everyone, which was to jab, kick, and move. Now, why did this game plan work against guys like Marvin Vettori and Jared Cannonier, but not against Sean Strickland? There are a few main reasons. For one, Sean is much faster and much more technical than these guys. He was even faster than Izzy was in this fight, and that was shown through their jabs. Look at where Izzy's hands were throughout the majority of the fight compared to Sean's. Izzy's hands were down and away at his hips, whereas Sean's hands were right there in front of him. This greatly decreases the time it takes to travel from point A to point B. As you can see with Sean's jab, he simply extends it out in front of him to the chin of Izzy in a straight line, whereas Izzy, because his hands are so low, he needs to bring his hand up and then straight, which not only increases the time it takes to reach Strickland's chin, but it also increases the distance he needs to travel to land the punch. With Sean, he is simply extending his hand forward with no upwards or downwards movement, whereas Izzy needs to move his hand up and then forward. As well, Sean's jab had much less telegraph to it. He simply would just throw it out there, whereas Izzy would flare his elbows and almost cock his right hand. Now, this usually wouldn't be as big of a deal against guys who aren't as experienced as Sean. However, because Sean has 33 professional fights and all he does is spar. I mean, this guy spars like 5 days a week, and I guarantee he has sparred more than Izzy, and he's probably sparred more than anyone in the UFC. And because of this, he's able to see and identify tells much better than most other fighters, allowing him to block, parry, and counter. Pretty much all of what Izzy was throwing, Sean was able to block or parry away, and then he would counter off of that, and Izzy was having a real hard time dealing with it. Sean also knew exactly where to cut off Izzy against the cage and wasn't reacting to any of his feints. One of Izzy's best weapons is his feints and ability to draw out reactions. However, Sean didn't explode. He didn't do anything crazy. As well, whenever Izzy was backed up against the cage, Sean did an amazing job cutting off at angles and knowing exactly where Izzy was going. In most of his fights, whenever Izzy would find himself against the cage, his movement and his footwork would be too much for his opponents, and he'd be able to escape out back back to the center. However, because of how much sparring Sean has done and because of how much he studied Izzy's game, he knew exactly where Izzy was going every time, allowing him to cut off at angles. You can see whenever Izzy found himself pressured against the fence, he would get into a parallel stance and try and shift away. However, Sean knew exactly where he was going and would land punches. The accuracy and the knowledge of your opponent this takes to do is insane. As well, Sean has drastically improved in his defense. We knew going into this fight how good his boxing defense was. He has some of the best boxing defense in the UFC. However, where he really made improvements was in his kicking defense. As going into this fight, that was one of his biggest weaknesses. I think at one point he had the lowest leg kick defense in the UFC. Even in his last fight, I don't know how to say his name. Whatever his name is, Magomedov, was really tearing Sean apart in the first round with the leg kicks. However, Sean was able to find a finish in the second round because Abbas completely gassed out. However, going into this fight, we knew Izzy wasn't going to do that, and I think that's why a lot of us picked Izzy, because we knew Sean's kicking defense, especially his leg kicking defense, was not very good, and Izzy is one of the most dynamic kickers in the UFC. However, Sean showed massive improvement in this area of his game, and although Izzy was still landing around half of his kicks, with the leg kicks being by far the most effective weapon he had throughout the entire fight, this is still a massive improvement from where he was previously. He showed a ton of ability to not only check the leg kicks, he checked a lot of them, but he also was able to lift his leg above a bunch of the kicks, which is something he's able to do because of how tall his stance is. Not only did he defend leg kicks very well, but he also defended body kicks and especially head kicks very well. Izzy was constantly throwing question mark kicks to the head, and I don't think he landed a single one. Every single time he would throw a question mark kick, Sean would either be able to avoid it or block it, which shows that kicking defense was a massive part of Sean's camp, which I'm sure Alex Pereira helped a ton with, as Alex has some of, and in my opinion, the best leg kicks in the UFC. Speaking of Alex, I see a lot of people asking, how was Alex able to knock out Sean, whereas Izzy couldn't even touch him? And it's very simple. Izzy was way too passive in this fight. I saw on Twitter that Izzy walked around 2 kilometers during his fight with Sean, and out of those 2 kilometers, Izzy was only moving forward for 39 meters, which for my fellow Americans out there means that Izzy was only walking forward for about 2% of the entire fight. Now, I have no clue if that stat is true. I have no clue how they would even measure that. However, even if that isn't true, Izzy was way too passive throughout the entire fight and way too willing to let Sean pressure him forward, which caused him to be against the cage far more than he should. Whereas in the Alex fight, although Sean was the one pressuring, Alex did an amazing job staying away from the fence, not allowing Sean to cut him off and catch him. Instead, he would circle away in the center of the octagon, which allowed him to stay away from the fence, baiting out Sean and setting up the left hook with no telegraph. Izzy, however, unlike Alex, wasn't looking for a finish. He was way too content to fight for a decision. However, this time, Sean didn't let Izzy sit at range and leg kick him to a decision like Izzy did against Cannonier. Instead, he would use technical pressure and not explode forward, exposing himself for counters, like Robert Whittaker did, which caused him to get knocked out. As well, whenever Izzy did try and bait out and counter, he telegraphed all of his punches. This is actually what got him dropped in the first round, because as Sean was moving forward, Izzy throws this extremely telegraphed looping left hook, which Sean easily saw and countered with a right straight, dropping Izzy and almost ending the fight. In a potential rematch, I think Izzy's key to victory is to be much more aggressive and actually go for a finish off his front foot and move forward. Don't let Sean pressure you. Sean does his best work when he is pressuring you behind his jab, which is pretty much exactly what he did in this fight. He beat Israel Adesanya through the basics of fighting. He stayed composed behind his jab, he didn't expose himself, he stayed smart defensively and offensively, and beat one of the greatest middleweights of all time in one of the biggest upsets in UFC history. And I see a lot of people saying Izzy didn't look good in this fight. He looked off. And that takes a lot away from Sean and just how impressive he performed in this fight. And it's just simply not true. Let me ask you this. What did Izzy do differently in this fight than he did in his previous fights? The answer is not much. He simply went up against a guy who had a great game plan and lost because of it. And in a potential rematch, I think he'll perform much better and it will be a much closer fight, which Dana White has come out and said that that is the next fight. Izzy and Sean are going to rematch. As for who I would favor in that fight, right now I would actually lean Sean to win the rematch and defend his title. But anyways, that is the end of the video. What an amazing performance from Sean. He did the unthinkable and pulled off arguably the biggest upset in UFC history. But with that being said, if you did enjoy this video, please be sure to like, comment your opinions down below, subscribe if you are new, turn on post notifications so you never miss an upload. Follow my brand on Instagram, linked in the description. Follow myself on Twitter and Instagram, also linked in the description, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
I'm stuck in a bad dream, Hollywood rich girl stuck in my backseat, and she wanna get at me, but the day's too short, can't let her distract me.